Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and with the prospect of an early general election within the next 10 months being realistic now, thoughts have to turn to how people might vote and if a Labour government could or would implement Brexit, assuming that Brexit is still the Labour position during a general election. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the prospect of a majority Labour government bound by its manifesto is a likely one, at least not while they stick to their current Brexit line. But don't be fooled by current polling either. As I've mentioned before, not only do the polls not give a good indication as to how seats would actually fill up in Parliament, given that we don't have proportional representation, but a general election has not yet been triggered. When it is, campaigning will begin in earnest and voting intentions could change significantly. Indeed, that is the whole point of campaigning. So let's just imagine that Labour wins a majority and Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister. The immediate benefits would be that the extremely cruel and even fatal Tory policies will be thrown in the bin. But the worry then will be Brexit. Just as in 2017, the manifesto could well be ambiguous. This is because Corbyn wants to promote Brexit, but the bulk of his party don't. It will therefore be worded in such a way that leave and remain both seem plausible when you read the manifesto. So a Labour manifesto under Corbyn will certainly give the indication that a Labour government would seek to take us out of the EU. But will it? Think about the process that has to take place for that to happen, and it looks very unlikely indeed. And this has nothing to do with the vast majority of the Labour Party and voters not wanting Brexit. I don't believe Corbyn can take us out even without rebellions in Parliament. Not that the rebellions can be discounted. MPs are not going to sit idly by and allow a Prime Minister to pursue a damaging Brexit. They didn't allow Theresa May to do this, and if we do end up with an early general election, that will also have meant that they didn't allow her successor to either. So in that event, Corbyn won't get an easy ride either. Now, when it comes to a no-deal exit, Jeremy Corbyn can't possibly take that route. He not only knows that it would be extremely damaging to the country, and the greater damage would be to the very people he says he wants to help, but he's spoken out against it in no uncertain terms. It's one of the few things that he hasn't been ambiguous about as leader. A Labour government, even one run by a Brexiteer, is not going to take us out with no deal. So that means taking us out with a deal. Now, he would seek to change the political declaration drawn up by the Conservatives, naturally. His position is that we should have a comprehensive customs union, that our standards and worker protection should remain aligned with the EU, and that we have alignment with the single market. And that, of course, is effectively being part of the EU without a say in the Parliament or in the Council. But it is Brexit, of a sort, just not one that Brexiteers accept as Brexit, even though it's exactly what they campaigned for before the referendum. But the point is that although the political declaration would be changed, and the EU would have no objections to that at all, they've said as much, the withdrawal agreement itself will not change. And this is what will tie Corbyn up in political knots. If he tries to take us out of the EU under these circumstances, the Conservatives, and indeed everyone else, will point out that he's taken us out of the EU with May's deal, which he will be. He will say that his commitment to EU systems makes it different, but it really doesn't. May's agreement still allowed for all of the things Corbyn said he wanted, even though nobody believes that a Conservative government would ever have delivered it. So he will be taking us out with the Conservative negotiated withdrawal agreement that he opposed, without a single word being altered. And you can bet your ass that all sections of the media will be reporting this. And it won't even just be the section of the media that are opposed to Jeremy Corbyn. Some will report it that way because they hate him, and the rest will report it that way because it's true. So he'd have to try and renegotiate the withdrawal agreement itself. Now, let's forget about the EU saying that they won't reopen the agreement itself for now. Let's pretend that they would be open to doing this for a Prime Minister who says they want a close relationship and don't come with a load of red lines. So what would he seek to change? Well, let's look at the withdrawal agreement. So it contains 5 main things. One is the settlement fee. Now, that is actually smaller than it should be, especially when you consider the extra expense we put the EU to with our messing about. So we're not about to get that reduced. Remember, it's not a fee or a divorce settlement, it's money we owe, so there's no scope for altering that. Or at least we could alter it upwards, but I don't think that's really something he wants to present to the people. 2, it contains details of a transition period. well, we might need to extend that as we'll have used up almost all of it with our procrastination. But in terms of the, in terms of the details, Corbyn would still want that intact, and nobody's going to accept a change in the dates as fundamentally a different agreement. And besides, the dates were fairly flexible anyway, with plenty of scope for extensions. No one really believed that the transition period would end when it says anyway, so you don't even really have to change the dates. 3, there is the dreaded backstop, or at least dreaded if you're a right-wing MP. No problem at all for Labour. Labour wants to maintain an open Ireland, so has no terrors at all about the backstop, so that's not going to be touched. 4, citizens' rights were covered in the agreement for both EU citizens in the UK as well as UK citizens in the EU. Labour are fully supportive of that, so we've got no beef with that section either. Finally, jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Well, we had to accept that during the transition deal. Accepting that isn't something that even the Conservative Brexiteers had a particular problem with, because there was an end in sight to that. In addition, Corbyn's version of Brexit would see us subject to the European Court on certain matters anyway, even after we leave the EU and even after the transition period, so there isn't going to be a bone of contention there either. In addition, if a Labour government did seek to reopen the agreement, other countries might want to add a few things in as well, notably fishing rights, which will end up being conceded anyway, and Gibraltar. So no, there's no prospect of altering the withdrawal agreement, because once you accept the notion of leaving the EU, there is nothing that any Labour MP has against it, least of all the Labour leader. Opposition to May's withdrawal agreement was, for most Labour MPs, about opposing Brexit, and for the rest was entirely about party politics. This is why those Labour MPs who don't care about either their party or their country were quite happy to vote for it. Corbyn's plan has always been to let the Conservatives destroy themselves by taking us out of the EU and then swooping in to pick up the pieces relatively unopposed. The plan goes to pieces as soon as he finds himself in number 10 whilst the UK is still in the EU. So Corbyn does want power, at least I think he does. Sometimes his actions make it difficult for me to really believe that, but he only wants it after the Conservatives have taken us out of the EU and destroyed themselves in the process. This is why he's not pushed them very hard in the Commons. So this is why, although I voted for a strongly Remain party in the European elections, I'd still vote Labour in a general election. Not only do I want Labour government for domestic politics, I just don't see how they can take us out of the EU, even with a leader who wants to. But, like I said, as much damage as the Tories are doing to themselves and leaving an open goal for Labour to score a majority in the Commons, Labour themselves are not exactly inspiring the population, as may be seen from the local and European elections. And although they triumphed in Peterborough, it was essentially down to the Brexit party splitting the right-wing vote with the Conservatives. So the best realistic prospect of a Labour government is in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, if the parliamentary arithmetic allows for it. And an absolute condition of that will be a public vote with Remain as an option. The Lib Dems will never enter coalition without that condition at least. I can literally see no route to a full or even partial Labour government that would see Brexit happening if we're still in the EU at the time. And finally, I should also point out that there has been growing pressure on Jeremy Corbyn to get behind the idea of a public vote with Remain as an option at the very least, and to do so before summer. So far, this pressure has not come from his allies, but more and more who are close to him are swinging behind that position. So it's entirely possible that those who insist that Labour can only win a general election as a Brexit party become marginalised enough for the drug-induced nonsense they're spouting to be swept aside by actually adopting Labour values for a change. But even if they don't persuade Jeremy Corbyn to change his stance, and at the moment it's not looking likely, it does also still show the increasing pressure within all sections of the Labour Party to oppose Brexit. So yet another reason to suppose that regardless of the current rather shaky position that the party holds, it's extremely doubtful that Labour ever would be a party that takes us out of the EU. So there we are. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.